I swear this is just a coincidence. This is the first Big Finish Doctor Who box set that I'm reviewing after Tom Baker received his MBE. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS, and as I make my way through the back catalogue of 2024 Big Finish releases, we've got some more Tom Baker. We've got the culminating box set of his Series 13 set. So we've had two prior box sets in Series 13. We had Storm of the Sea Devils, then we had Metamorphosis, and now we have Dominant Species. So for those of you who haven't been keeping up to date, or for some reason just want to jump on at part 3 of 3 for whatever reason. This series is set during a time when the Fourth Doctor is travelling alone, and in an adventure in Calcutta featuring the Sea Devils, he reunited with Harry Sullivan, who's working with UNIT, and also Naomi Cross, who is a fresh face at UNIT as well. And basically, over this past series, we've had another TARDIS trio, almost kind of emulating the Season 12 TARDIS team dynamic, except you've got Eleanor Crooks as Naomi Cross, instead of Elizabeth Sladen as Sarah Jane Smith. Christopher Naylor does an incredible job filling in the boots of the late Ian Marter, playing Harry Sullivan, and of course we've got Tom Baker, because who on earth could possibly replace Tom Baker? We've had a Sea Devil story, we've had a story featuring Geoffrey Beavis as the Master, and also Annette Badland as the Celestial Toymaker, and for the final two serials of Series 13, we've got a two-parter, we've got The Face in the Storm by Sarah Grahalla, and also a four-parter, Dominant Species by John Dorney, the latter of which features the return of the Dominators and the Quarks from the Patrick Troughton era. I'll start off with The Face in the Storm by Sarah Grahalla. So it's set in 1916, it's World War I, and we're on the cargo ship, the SS Maycrest. Basically, in World War I, in order to bolster the ranks of the Allied forces, the British Army would transport soldiers on cargo ships from the West Indies. In this case, you've got a ship making its way from Jamaica to Halifax. However, some time travel shenanigans are happening as Naomi Cross meets her grandfather on board of the ship, Samuel, played by Kai Ushi. And naturally, the priority is, don't destroy history, don't kill your grandfather. But there is a spanner in the works. More specifically, there's an interdimensional alien in the cargo hold. It's in this massive freezing containment unit, and it is called a Yukiona, and it's voiced by Helen Goldwyn. And it has incredible freezing powers, and you can't really communicate or reason with it. And with such a powerful, potentially hostile being on board of this cargo ship, it's almost inevitable that times might get screwed up. It's essentially up to the Doctor, Harry, and Naomi to not destroy history, and to also save the crew of the SS Maycrest.
Well, I must say this is all very cozy. Nothing like a hot, roaring fire on a cold winter's night.
Did I say you could sit?
I suppose a cup of tea's out of the question?
Who are you?
Well,
Let me, Doctor. I know the naval mind. Surgeon Lieutenant Harry Sullivan, sir. These are my friends, Miss Naomi Cross and the Doctor.
Doctor what?
Doctor nothing. It's just Doctor.
If you insist. What are you doing on my ship? How did you even get on board? Presumably you've been hiding in the hold since we left Kingston.
Kingston, Jamaica.
Where else?
And those men out there on deck?
British West Indies Regiment. We're transporting them to the Western Front.
Oh.
You are transporting men across the Atlantic on a cargo ship? That's absurd. There are no proper quarters. They'd have to camp out on the deck.
Very unsuitable in this weather.
You know exactly why we're doing this.
Do I? I don't think so.
Sarah Grahalla in the behind-the-scenes interviews says that the story was loosely based off of the Halifax incident from 1916, not to be confused with the Halifax explosion of 1917. The Halifax incident revolved around the SS Verdala cargo ship, which was going from the West Indies to Halifax. This was in late winter 1916, and you had all of these black crew members who were not allowed in the cargo because of segregation. They had to sleep on the deck, but they only had their summer clothes because they'd just come from the Caribbean, and there's storms, there's terrible winter weather, and hundreds of the black crew members got frostbite, and many of them died. And the idea of segregation on the SS Verdala cargo ship makes its way also to the SS Maycrest in this fictionalized story. I kind of wish that that pseudo-historical element played a bigger role in The Face in the Storm, but because this story is only 2 episodes, it means that we basically have 2 narrative strands in this episode. The first one is Naomi with her grandfather Samuel, trying to learn more about her family history, trying not to get him killed. She also meets her surrogate uncle, aka Samuel's best friend Arnold, played by Rhys Pantry, and gets to know him really well. And then you've got the Doctor and Harry with Captain Edward, played by Christopher Weeks, and they're trying to stop the Yuki-Onna. You've also got a set piece where a torpedo from an opposing ship ends up hitting the cargo ship, and then they're sinking and the water's rushing in. The Doctor spends the first episode unable to use his sonic screwdriver because it gets frozen in a really funny scene early on. The Doctor's like, well, apparently that is possible. And a lot of episode 2 is Tom Baker's Doctor saying, I have no idea how I can stop the Yuki-Onna. And because the threat is built up so much, it does feel like at the end there's a bit of a Deus Ex Machina. And that's exacerbated because, once again, this is only 2 episodes long. It means it kind of has to rush to a conclusion, as opposed to, like, building the stakes, building the threat up. It feels really strange that you have this massive, potentially, like, universal ending threat that's taking place in 1916 Halifax on this unassuming cargo ship. And then it's resolved relatively easily because it's just rushing its way to the 3rd act. But I can partially forgive that because this story is meant to be about Naomi meeting her grandfather. But once again, we're dealing with such a truncated runtime that essentially it's just her speaking with Samuel and Arnold in just an isolated part of the ship far away from the main plot and somehow completely out of harm's way. And it's just these characters essentially reading Wikipedia biographies to each other because the character work can't really shine through because you have to prioritize the logistics of the plot and the logistics of the family tree and Naomi's personal history and personal lineage. It just needed another episode. It needed a part 3. The cast are really good. I love the sound design for it, and I think the Yuki-Onna is a really interesting threat, and, you know, Helen Goldwyn does a really interesting performance in regards to the creature's voice, but it feels like a story that's just in a massive rush to get in and then a massive rush to get back out again. As a result, what could have been a really strong character-driven story for Naomi, and we know that she can do him, we know that Eleanor Crooks can carry stories like this because we had the Naomi's Arc story with the 7th Doctor in 2023. The end result means that there's just not a lot here, unfortunately, apart from some really interesting history and some Doctor Who world building with the potential origin point of UNIT, which is that's pretty interesting. This was recorded pre-Survivors of the Flux, so I don't really know if that's been contradicted now, but whatever, Doctor Who continuity is already a mess. Speaking of Doctor Who continuity, we have the second story here, Dominant Species by John Dorney, and this is a 4-parter, with it taking up 2/3 of the whole box set. This is basically the climactic series finale. And also, for context, I've never watched the Patrick Troughton Second Doctor story, The Dominators. I've never seen it before. Yes, I know about the Halifax incident from 1916, but I don't know about the Dominators. Clearly my priorities are in all of the wrong place to be a Doctor Who YouTuber. But this is a story that John Dorney really wanted to write, or more specifically, he really wanted to write a story about the Dominators. The Doctor, Harry and Naomi land on the holiday world of Teleria, or what's left of it, because of the aftermath of a Dominator invasion of the solar system. The planet has been stripped of all resources, the landscape is completely barren, and there's just a couple of slaves left. One of whom is Nala, played by Emily Woodward. And for the Dominators, you've got Director Draga, played by Clive Wood, who is the subordinate of the Overseer Valtor, played by Clive Haywood. And apparently the qualifications to play a Dominator for Big Finish is just to be called Clive.
So while the Dominators were taking over this system, nobody helped? None of the galactic powers attempted to intervene, not one?
Why would they? They weren't under threat.
They refused to step in unless the Dominators moved on their own systems, which they were smart enough not to do.
So the rest of the universe just stands by and watches as a beautiful world is destroyed? The Quark that brought me here mentioned a division.
Now the resources of this world have been exhausted. They're separating us into groups of the strong and the infirm.
Yes, they do that.
The strong they're taking with them to work another world, and the weak they're abandoning here.
No, Nala, not abandoning. That's not it.
Then what are they doing?
They are releasing us. They are setting us free.
What? You say tomato, and I say tomato.
They're only taking, what, 2%? The rest of the population, tens of thousands. They'll never again have to suffer at their hands. Never again have to toil in those damned mines.
Well, but there's nothing here. I appreciate your eagerness to escape their yoke, but if you're old or infirm, Fending for yourself in a barren world is not likely to be much of a picnic.
The Doctor, Harry, and Naomi get separated. The Doctor and Nala try and find a way to stop the Dominators and their robot servants, the Quarks. And in terms of the plot of Dominant Species, that's all I can really talk about without getting into some minor spoilers, because at the end of part 1, the story completely changes tact. And that's where all the really interesting stuff that I really want to talk about happens. So if you want my spoiler-free conclusion, go to the last minute or two of this video. But for those of you who don't mind minor spoilers for basically the first act of Dominant Species, then feel free to watch on. So part 1 of Dominant Species ends with the Doctor and Nala being taken away on a Dominator spaceship, whilst Harry and Naomi stay on Teleria. However, the Dominators just up and destroy the planet. And then part 2 opens with a time skip to a month later, where the Doctor is essentially working with the Dominators but plotting his moment to try and save the rest of the solar system from having the same fate as Teleria, but he carries this really heavy, somber attitude with him because he's let his friends down. Not only did Teleria get destroyed and he couldn't stop it, which really hangs on his conscience, but 2 of his best friends are dead. And Nala is like his surrogate companion for a big portion of the story, but she has just had her spirit completely crushed. She has like no resolve left after all of this time. But of course, Harry and Naomi, who did not die, they managed to escape at the last moment, and they are now part of a resistance group who are trying to scrape together some resources to try and take down the Dominators, not knowing that the Doctor is still alive. It's a really fascinating story pivot, and it almost feels a bit like, I don't want to say Stephen Moffat-y, because Stephen Moffat did not invent time skips in Doctor Who, obviously not, but the idea of this story taking place over the span of several months, and the characters are growing and evolving, and, you know, their spirit and resolve changes over the course of this pretty lengthy story, it gives Dominant Species a real weight to it, and it allows Tom Baker to really flex his dramatic chops. I love, in a way, like how reserved he is. Like, he doesn't want to grieve too much because he's trying to keep his spirits up somewhat for the remaining survivors there, but also just these really quiet, contemplative moments where he just kind of hangs his head in shame because he let Harry and Naomi die, as far as he's aware. The TARDIS is lost. He's just biding his time, just sort of chipping away at the, like, morale of the director Draga, and the dynamic between the Doctor and Draga, who is like the lead dominator of the story, the main antagonist, is so much fun. Clive Wood is great in this. I don't know if this is like a faithful depiction of the Dominators from the second Doctor story. I don't know if this repeats any beats or if there's any callbacks or references or whatever. I have no idea. So for all I know, Dominant Species could just be repeating the formula from a nearly 60-year-old story, and if that's the case, I apologize for not knowing, but it made Dominant Species a really strong story overall, and it also kind of ties into the themes of just having to trust that the Doctor has their best interest at heart. Nala is convinced that the Doctor has betrayed her and her people and is just working with the Dominators. Harry and Naomi, ultimately there is a reunion, you know, there's obviously that's how it's going to end for multiple reasons, we'll get to that later, but the way they reunite, it's like, okay, Doctor, maybe he shouldn't have been rescued, you know, maybe he knew what he was doing all along. I don't want to make this seem like this is just a really somber war story. It is a really effective war epic, for lack of a better term. But yeah, there are some fun moments as well. Harry Sullivan has to disguise himself as a Dominator later on, which is why you've got this image on the cover here. Tom Baker is great as well, and the Dominator dynamics between each other, like interpersonally, Dominator to Dominator, is intentionally camp. At least I think it's intentional. There's a really great scene, I think it's in part 3, when Draga essentially like flips the game table, and that whole scene is really tense and effectively done, and it doesn't even feature the Doctor in it either. Oh, and that reminds me, another thing I did like a lot about Dominant Species is that obviously there's that, you know, part 1 cliffhanger where the Doctor thinks that Harry and Naomi are dead and he's completely failed, but what I really liked about this story was that every cliffhanger was very effective. With the end of every part and the beginning of the next part, the status quo is shifting somewhat, which makes Dominant Species a really well-paced and effective story. It takes place over several months, but it's you know, it's a real fast-paced listen. Like the 90 to 100 minute runtime, it just kind of flies by, but you still get the sense of scale, not just in time, but that, you know, the enormity of the conquest that the Dominators are undertaking. It's a whole solar system that's being invaded, but it all comes down to just a handful of characters on barren worlds, and it doesn't feel like it's a limited story. It almost starts off a bit like Destiny of the Daleks Part 1, like, you know, it's set in a rock quarry, and there's an invading force, and the Doctor's, like, infiltrating stuff. You know, it starts very much like that, but then it does become something, like, much bigger and grander in scale. And of course, because this is the series finale, this does end with Harry and Naomi leaving. And we knew that this was going to happen eventually because there was a reference in a 7th Doctor Harry and Naomi audio, Orbital London, where they mentioned that after a story with the Dominators where a lot of people died, that's where they parted ways. And this is what I was referring to earlier when I said that Harry and Naomi were obviously not going to die, because not only have we seen Harry and Naomi work at UNIT in the modern day, no less, even though these characters came from the 1970s or the 1980s, but they've also travelled with the 7th Doctor, which definitely takes place after their adventures with the 4th Doctor, or in Harry's case, his second lot of adventures with the 4th Doctor. UNIT Nemesis 1 was released in November 2021 and was recorded in January 2021. The 7th Doctor Sullivan and Cross AWOL box set came out in November 2022 and was recorded in July and August 2022. However, this one, despite coming out in September 2024, was recorded in October 2020. So this was recorded over 4 years ago and predates their canonical Big Finish 2012 UNIT reintroduction. They've just been released out of order, which is strange. But that's the thing with these 4th Doctor box sets. They've recorded these years ago. They've recorded and they've banked a huge amount of Tom Baker 4th Doctor stories. So if something were to happen to Tom Baker, like tomorrow, God forbid, then they've probably got Big Finish 4th Doctor adventures for years to come, which is kind of strange to think about. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So Harry and Naomi were always going to leave, and they were always going to wind up in 2012 London to work for UNIT again. But I felt their departure was a little bit rushed. Like, it kind of makes sense why after this story of all stories they would decide to leave the 4th Doctor, or at least have a bit of downtime. So it worked there, but when it comes to the 4th Doctor's reaction to saying goodbye to his friends and after everything that's happened, it kind of felt a bit lacking. I know that the 4th Doctor is pretty lackadaisical, or at least he presents himself as pretty laid back and like no nonsense and such, but I don't know, it felt like something was missing here. Maybe he could have taken the departure a little bit harder, I don't know. It's why I think Series 13, despite having some pretty strong stories, as like an overall arc for the Doctor and the companions, does feel a little bit like a step down from Series 12, which had the 4th Doctor, Leela and Margaret, and you can draw a pretty definitive line from where Margaret starts at the beginning of the series up to the end and the journey that she goes on, and the Doctor and Leela following her and joining her on that journey. Whereas with Series 13, it's like, yeah, the Doctor, Harry and Naomi had a bunch of adventures and fun times, and Sea Devils and the Master and the Toymaker and Dominators. But anyway, I'm kind of waffling. Dominant Species was a really strong finale to Series 13, if you put aside the pretty rushed departure of the companions. It's epic, fun, but still quite somber and heavy with some really strong performances. I think that Eleanor Crooks is sort of on the back burner for this story, but Christopher Naylor and Tom Baker really get some great opportunities to shine here. The Dominators are really fun, particularly Clive Wood as Draga. Really strong performance, a really effective villain with a really entertaining dynamic with the Doctor. Yeah, I think John Dorney did a really good job here. I kind of feel like Sarah Grahalla might have drawn the short straw with this formatting, though. I think that The Face in the Storm has some really strong moments, but it needed that third part. It needed another episode dedicated to it, because the effective world building and character work is kind of just left on the table because it has to hurtle towards a conclusion. It's a good two-parter, but it really should have been a great three-parter. But yeah, that ends Series 13 of the 4th Doctor Adventures. 7 stories across 3 box sets, and we're going to be joining the 4th Doctor and once again Leela for Series 14, which starts with the Hellwood Inheritance. That starts in March 2025. And yeah, like I said, they've really banked these stories. This was recorded between June and November 2020. Have you been keeping up to date with the 4th Doctor Adventures, specifically Series 13? If so, what was your favourite story from these 7? Let me know in the comment section below. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more Big Finish Doctor Who reviews, and I'll see you all next time.